The waning decades of the 17th century remained, for a majority of mankind, the bleakest of times. Kings ruled at the pleasure of the Almighty. All others did what they were told to do. For millions of subjects eking out a meager existence and shackled in ignorance, life was fleeting, dirty, and cheap. Public opinion scarcely existed, even as a meaningful concept, and the weak endured what they must, forcibly grateful for what little they had. Whether one was standing in Salem, Massachusetts, or in Paris on the banks of the River Seine, let alone amid the cold snows of Moscow, the future, as much as anyone could see of it, appeared unchanging and immutable, an era of perpetual illness and barbarism, abduction and subservience, superstition and famine. This was all the more ironic because the day was fast approaching that would yield to an era of teachers and lawgivers, builders and administrators, philosophers and learned men, and enlightened rulers as well. Ironic, too, because a subtle and powerful new spirit would soon be rising in the world, a mighty political storm of revolution, republicanism, democracy. And ironic because in many ways, more so than at any time in human history, tucked inside a few corners of 17th century Europe and especially the New World, there was already an increasingly forward-looking community filled with uncommon radiance and energy. Nowhere was this more evident than in the supreme monarchy of the day. Between the people and the sovereign, a bright line was drawn. The royalty of the age was invested in glory, bathed in mystique, and clothed in magical powers. To be king was not simply to be lord of men, a host of great feasts, but a giver of rings, of gold, of landed estates. It was to be a builder, a warrior, a patron of the arts, and a latter-day version of Apollo. It was to be the very embodiment of civilization, answerable only to God, and in one instance, to be civilization itself. Never was this more the case than in France, the forefront of world civilization, where Louis XIV, His Most Christian Majesty, reigned, and where, in 1682, one of the greatest palaces in the world, it was actually a chateau, was being finished. Versailles. France itself was a land of sharp contradictions. With its fertile soil, it was the wealthiest country on the globe, even if millions still lived in appalling poverty. The aristocracy held sway as in no other era, yet there was also a growing middle class: lawyers, office holders, bureaucrats, and merchants. France was a self-sufficient country, yet the French of this century reached out everywhere. Trade in India and Madagascar, the founding of Canada. It was French Canadians, along with their Indian allies, who tormented the settlers on the wild Massachusetts frontier, sending terrified refugees streaming south to Salem, and farther west, penetrating the Great Lakes and the Mississippi Valley. They established plantations in the West Indies, expanded ancient French commerce with the Levant, and enlarged the French Navy, an act that would one day have unforeseen but immense consequences for America and the world. When Louis was just 9, France erupted into revolution, spurred on by discontented nobles and a new rash of stringent government revenue schemes. Known as the Fronde, it was the precursor to the French Revolution. Barricades were thrown up and street fighting broke out in Paris. Along with the nobility, Paris's courts also rebelled, seeking to circumscribe the crown. And at the height of this violence, armed bands led by nobles roamed the countryside, terrorizing the peasants. One night, the boy king himself and his mother were besieged by an angry Paris mob. Surrounded by horrid cries and the crackle of muskets outside his windows, Louis was hastily spirited off to Saint-Germain, where he spent the night on a bed of straw. It was a frightful moment, and formative. While the uprising was eventually subdued, it took 5 murderous years, the rebellion made a lasting impression on the Sun King. Scarred by the tumult, he was adamant from then on to be his own man, answerable to no one, and he was equally determined never to be controlled by scheming ministers or thickets of court intrigue, a choice